through the Gita, chapter number 16, the yoga of divine and demoniacal natures. And of course, this points to the ultimate purpose of our human existence, which is, are we bound to the cycle of birth and death, or are we working towards our liberation? And of course, each of these categories of the nature will tell us which, if you behave in such a manner, which direction are you likely to be going. So let's see what the themes are in chapter number 16. First of all, I'm of course going to talk about the logic and the flow of the thoughts so far, and also a recap in terms of what we have kind of gathered over the last 15 chapters, and also the flow of the practice itself, because I think that is important for us to keep on reminding ourselves that there is this very much a practical aspect of the Bhagavad Gita, and therefore living through the Gita is what we are talking about here. So in the first verses, Bhagwan is giving the divine and the demoniacal natures and their destinies. And these are the two pathways towards bondage or towards liberation. And then Bhagwan goes on to say in detail the demoniacal nature and its consequences. And then he talks about the ordinance of the scriptures as a basis for action. And you can see this is a short chapter, only 24 verses, but it gives us a very good picture in terms of which direction are we going to go in terms of development of our spiritual nature. And of course, the Bhagavad Gita is all about the spiritual development on the one hand and the attainment of the spiritual goal on the other. And while we are kind of doing all these practices as Bhagwan has prescribed to us, we'll begin to see this change in nature. And that requires us to put in effort, purusharth, in order for us to effect this kind of inner transformation. And this is also relevant in this chapter as well, because we are given a clear picture of what it is to have divine qualities and what it is have to the devilish qualities, and therefore where to make this change in our own life. And that is important for us to determine. And then, of course, the practical aspect of it is what are we going to do now with this knowledge which we have just kind of attained. Um, I think somebody is making marks on the screen. I don't know. Namrata, your name is coming up. Okay, so going back to the overview of the Bhagavad Gita, and as I have mentioned many times before, is that Bhagavad Gita can be seen to be divided into three sections. The first section is about the human being and the human nature and the condition of the human nature and the predicament of where we find ourselves. The second set of 6 chapters is telling us about the nature of the divine. And the third set of 6 chapters, which is where we are at the moment in terms of the logic of the Bhagavad Gita, is the relationship between the Jiva and the Ishvara. And this is what it is telling us, the kind of relationship described in terms of the oneness of the Atman and Brahman. So the whole kind of setting is quite clear. And as I've said before, these are really the relationship between the human and the divine, Purusha and Prakriti. And we started looking at this in chapter number 13, the field and the knower of the field, where now Bhagwan changes the channel, as it were, and taking us to understanding really what is the relationship between the human and the divine, the transactional and the eternal. And chapter number 14 then gives us how Prakriti is really predominantly functioning in our cells as this individual jivas in Prakriti. And all this is described as a play of the gunas. So when I look at myself, I see, yes, there are some gunas which are now uh, playing within the body, mind, intellect. And according to the nature of the gunas are the expression in Prakriti and in the body, in the mind, in the intellect. And then thinking about how we can transcend Prakriti by going towards Purusha, and how we can transcend the gunas and the gunic nature in order to reach that is which is the highest. And then Bhagwan, of course, tells us that, okay, you're going to transcend this gunic nature, but where are you going to arrive at? And how is that now related to what you are experiencing in your day to day transaction? So, this is the supreme being, Purushottama, and the manifestation as the Jiva. A very interesting chapter where it describes the upside down tree. And then this is the chapter which we are looking at now, the divine and the demoniacal natures, and how they express themselves in our individual human nature. And of course, it's not either you are this or you are that. There can be, of course, a mixture of all these things. And we have to begin to discern really what is it that we need to keep and what is it that we need to transform. And then the next chapter is going to be on the threefold faith. And why Bhagwan is telling us about faith? Because that is really the foundation of our spiritual life. And therefore, how to develop and cultivate the sattvic faith so that it can take us towards the eternal. And then the final chapter is about liberation through renunciation. It is a summary of all the knowledge and guidance given to us throughout the Bhagavad Gita. And then Arjuna's decision as to whether he is going to fight. So, very systematically, Bhagwan is developing this whole idea about what is human nature, how does it express itself, what is the deficiency which is keeping the soul to be suffering here, this jiva to be suffering here in this transactional reality, and then what are the solutions. So, as we have described, it is the jiva which is in a problem of suffering, and the solution to the suffering is not something which is playing on the surface. We can have many different types of solution to suffering, but here it is right to the core of ourselves and understanding who we truly are that we can solve this problem once and for all. So, Bhagwan is not giving us the solution to individual problems. Bhagwan is giving us the solution to problem of problems. The problem of problems is because we are identified with this human being as this body, mind, intellect. And as we take ourselves to be this body, mind, intellect, we keep on suffering. As soon as we begin to understand that really this is not my true nature is that of Brahman. And if I move towards that and attain that um, sense of self realization, then I will attain that which is the ultimate and transcending this kind of prakritic nature, body, mind, intellect, I can attain the highest and go beyond suffering and go beyond the cycles of birth and death. So let's look at kind of the practice which we have been talking about so far. And there is a schematic which I've been talking about in terms of what is the transition which we have to make in terms of our own pathway. And one of the good ways of thinking about it is to think of this jiva as an ego operating system. And of course, Bhagwan mentions many times that it is the selfish desires which keep on kind of taking us and moving us round and round this cycle of death and birth. And because we are operating at the ego operating system, therefore the suffering is going to be present for us in this transactional life. So it is all based on our past conditioning, which is the vasanas. These are all the accumulated samskaras which we have been carrying with us for millions of lives. And as I mentioned before, that every person who gets born carries with him two bags. One bag is the bag of vasanas, which we carry all our lives. It is the bag which we've been carrying in all our lives. The second bag is the bag of our prarabdha karma, which is only for this life. And then once this life is over, we throw that particular bag and get another one, while we keep the same bag of vasanas. So this bag is huge. In fact, this bag is so full of our impressions that it is bursting, and we keep on accumulating more and more impressions in our lives. So this is the past conditioning. It has got intentions, it's got beliefs, it's got attitudes, which we have been acquiring all this time. And it is through the body, through the mind, through the intellect that it begins to function as desires in the body, mind, intellect, sensations in the body, feelings in the mind, thoughts in the intellect. This is the BMI chart Puja Gurudev always used to show us on the stage. And it is all about actions and reactions. So, filtering right from the past conditioning, vasanas, inclination, and tendencies, which come together as desires for attainment of the things of the world, acting through the body, mind, intellect, we take some action. And of course, there is a reaction which takes place. And those impressions again go back to the past conditioning. So we are always accumulating impressions and developing vasanas, cultivating more vasanas even. And this is how it goes round and round the merry-go-round of samsara. So this is the me and the mind, the ego individual. And then what happens is that we have got the ego operating system where we are at the moment. This is Arjuna's condition where he's full of shoka, moha, and bhaya. And this is what we keep on experiencing in our day to day transactions. And from there, we have to start operating in a different system, which is called the Dharma operating system. And when we have established ourselves in this kind of way in transacting with the world, what begins to happen is that purification of the mind takes place, chitta shuddhi takes place, and then we begin to move towards realization of the self, where we then move into the God operating system, which means that the ego has disappeared. What is now actually operating in the body, mind, intellect is the divine will. And divinity itself is expressing itself, fulfilling its own purpose. So, ego operating system to Dharma operating system to the God operating system. This is a movement which is taking place when we begin to uh, think about the pathway which the Bhagavad Gita is guiding us towards. So now think about how we can uh, look at the ego operating. So it's self-centered, selfishness is there, attachment is there, me and mine is there. In the in the Dharma operating system, what we do is we begin to dedicate all our actions to God. So it becomes God-centered life rather than a self-centered life. There is selflessness and detachment. Detachment because we are now not attaching ourselves to the fruit of the action, nor are we attaching ourselves to the action itself. So this sense of doership and enjoyership begins to reduce, and that is called purification. And it is all about thee and thine. It is not about me and mine. We keep on talking about my this, me this, my this, me this. It's about God. The whole focus shifts as we begin to transact in our day to day life. And it is about God, seeing God everywhere, being with God everywhere, transacting in the world for God. So it is about thee and thine. And then finally, when we reach that state of realization, what happens is we begin to operate in a very different manner. Why? Because there is no me. It has gone out of the body mind intellect system, and what is operating is God, divinity itself. It becomes humanity centered, whereby now these instruments become in the service of humanity. It begins to function in a completely different manner. These are the masters. We have seen how masters operate. And there is no self, there is no ego. It is only love and compassion which expresses itself through these masters. And it is the divine design that is all about this body, mind, intellect instrument operating in this way. So purification in the first place by making this transition from the ego operating system to the Dharma operating system. And secondly, self-realization when we have moved towards the ultimate realization of our true nature. So keeping this in mind, uh, we know that the ego becomes the seeker and that becomes the person of wisdom. And again, to kind of emphasize selfish actions done in ignorance, selfless action done in knowledge, action in inaction, and then actionlessness completely as far as the ego is concerned, because the ego has now disappeared and that becomes established in truth. and therefore inaction in action. These are all the concepts which Bhagwan uses in the Bhagavad Gita. Again, purification, self-realization, purification through action, knowledge, and renunciation. And of course, action is associated with bhakti as well, the path of devotion, and then absorption and meditation in the second stage of a spiritual journey. And then it is done in the spirit of sacrifice. So, this is how we have to understand what is going on. And this is a transformation which is taking place. Why I'm explaining this is because it's directly relevant to this chapter. And the swabhav which is there, the vasanas, the past conditioning, is really how we express ourselves in ignorance. If we are in a state of ignorance, then we will see there is a preponderance of the demoniacal nature. It may not be the extreme, but of course, the nature, when it is expressing itself in this way, means that we are still within the realm of the ego and the egocentric desires. And the demoniacal nature, which is being described here, is nothing but the extreme of the ego operating system. From there, knowing what our swadharma is, using our buddhi, using the intellect to make that viveka, that discernment between what is right and what is wrong, we begin to express dharma in our transactional life through the buddhi. And buddhi is there to give us the viveka as to what is right and what is wrong. And we keep on moving towards the path of shreyas, away from the path of preyas. And finally, when we have attained this purification and got absorbed in the true nature, we then come to the real self, which is our Swaswarupa. So, this is the journey again. This is the transformation track. And all the verses of the Bhagavad Gita have got to do with one of this or the other. And it takes us through a very step by step journey of reaching the highest truth. So, how is that going to be done? Bhagwan also tells us that process of change is hard because the mind itself is very hard to conquer. As we all know, that mind is a very fickle instrument. It keeps on doing its own job, monkey mind, going all over the place. But Bhagwan says, yes, there is a solution. And here's a solution is that you do abhyas and you practice vairagya. With abhyas means this single pointedness of determination, devotion, and dedication to the spiritual pathway. And doing all the practices which are prescribed to us. Vairagya means letting go of all that which belongs to the ego. And as we let go of the ego, we go towards the divine. And going through the divine means all the sadhana which Bhagwan has given to us in a very clear manner. And how is that going to be done? Shravanam, Mananam, Nididhyasanam, listening to the knowledge, reflecting on the knowledge, and then practicing the knowledge so that it becomes real for us. It is no longer a concept in the Bhagavad Gita, but it is experienced directly by us. And in this manner, I already described the four A's, the four B's, and the four C's, and the four D's. And that, again, you can refer back to my earlier talks and see what they are. But certainly, this is the framework within which we have to operate. And Bhagwan has also given us the means of change, which is the 9 tools of the toolkit. Vivek, Vairagya, Satsampati, and Mumukshatva. And Satsampati are the 6 disciplines which are absolutely essential for our spiritual journey. And then, of course, meditation, concentration, and contemplation. These are, again, the means of our change. And as we begin to look at this divine and devilish qualities, we can see how are we going to change our nature. Because it's all about how are we going to change our nature so that it becomes more and more divine. And that means we have to find ways of changing. And what are the tools of changing are all these things which are given to us by the masters. So Bhagwan has also kind of talked to us about the spectrum of human nature from the divine to the demoniacal. And we have studied this in chapter number 2 itself, whereby Bhagwan in the last 18 verses gives us the markers of the person of wisdom. The unsteady person, which is now going towards the demoniacal, and the established, which is going towards the completely divine person. Unsteady is full of desires, attachments in the me and the mind, agitated, no control of the senses or the mind, slips down the ladder of fall, sleeping in ignorance. Tamasic. And then as he begins to develop and purify himself, so the senses and the mind start coming under control, desires and attachment are also controlled, steady in wisdom. Steady in wisdom means that the knowledge is established and there is steadiness in being in that knowledge, practicing that knowledge, and ability to meditate on the self. So from the unsteady to the steady. And as the steadiness begins to develop and the absorption is available in this deepest of meditation, then at a certain point, realization takes place. And Bhagavan describes the characteristics of the man of realization, the person of steady wisdom. Sthita Prajna Lakshana. In other words, the characteristics of the person who has established himself or herself in the truth. Satisfied in the self, by the self, no desires, free from fear, free from anger, no I-ness, no minus, equanimity, steady wisdom, peace and tranquility, awake in the Brahmic state, realization, enlightenment, and beyond all delusion. Can you imagine this wonderful state which we all want to be? And Bhagwan has given us absolutely clear instruction as to how to get there. And then again in chapter number 5, Bhagwan gives this state of realization, who is the knower of the Atman, intellect absorbed in that which is the truth, their self being that, in other words, that they are completely absorbed in this truth about themselves, established in that, so that there is no coming back. And then that is their supreme goal. So they've reached that supreme goal of complete realization of the self and establishing themselves in that truth. They go whence there is no return. Once you are realized, then there is no coming back to the ego. Ego itself becomes uh, disappears completely. Their sins are dispelled by the knowledge. So here sins means the ego is dispelled completely by this knowledge of the truth, and this is called the knower of the Atman, the Atmavit. So Bhagwan has given us also another idea. So Bhagwan is going to tell Arjuna in this chapter that I've talked a lot about the divine qualities. Now I'm going to talk about the devilish qualities. So this is just a reminder for us to remember that Bhagwan has been talking about these divine qualities right from chapter number 2. And I'm just trying to point out some of the things which we have already talked about, not everything, but certainly some of the indicators of the divine qualities. And then, interestingly, in chapter number 7, Bhagwan gives us 7 categories of people and their relationship with the divine. Now, here we see that Bhagwan is talking about the extreme end of one spectrum, which is the complete devilish qualities. And then he goes on to give us the other end of the spectrum, whereby the realized master is there. And these 3 categories, he says, they do not seek me. They whose discrimination has been destroyed by their own delusion follow the way of the asuras. So Bhagwan has already mentioned this asuric qualities, demoniacal qualities in this particular way in chapter number 7. So he's taking up this in detail now in this chapter which we're going to talk about today. So the evildoers, no sense of right and wrong, end up doing all the evil deeds, do not use viveka at all. And then the deluded, the mudha, the foolish people live in complete ignorance. They are passive, powerless, unable to act responsibly. These are the people who are called the mudha, the deluded, the foolish people. And then the third category of these asuras are the lowest of men. They have no discrimination, close to animalistic behavior. So even humanity is somehow not quite there. No belief in anything higher or nobler. They don't believe what I see is what I believe. And this is the kind of people who have no discrimination as to what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is not good. And therefore they make all kinds of mistakes. And therefore Bhagwan says close to animalistic behavior. And then the other categories which Bhagwan describes, four different kinds of virtuous men. Now, these are the ones who have cultivated the divine qualities. So, also in chapter number 7, Bhagwan is talking about the divine qualities. And of course, this is now the bottom of the ladder for the virtuous men. It is like the dissatisfied, someone who is lacking something, unhappy, asking God for help when there is a problem. Otherwise, maybe they are not that much interested in spirituality or the divine. It's only when something comes up. Oh, I don't have this. I want this. I want this. See, how I want is still the basis of the ego operating in that kind of way. But now he or she goes to God and says, look, I don't have this. I'm going to offer some prasad. Meanwhile, you give me what I want. And then the next category is the seeker of the wealth, arthati. And also here, seekers of all kinds of wealth, material, social, individual, they pray to God to obtain this. And then we have got the seeker of knowledge. Ignasu has developed a desire to know God, not wanting anything, seeks to connect. And this is, somebody who's really now interested in finding out, not for the sake of, I want to get something or I want to give up something, but it's really interested in uh, the divine for its own sake. And then the last category, which is a complete expression of the divine qualities, is the jnani, the wise. He has gone beyond the stages of asking for anything, knows God in essence and reality, and has achieved a high degree of purity, so much purity that is just about to step into the realized state. So we can see Bhagavan has already described to us in different ways the divine and the demoniacal qualities and the different kind of categories of people, the beings and bhaktas who are there, who are moving along the spectrum towards divinity. So divine qualities, again, to remind ourselves that even starting in Vibhuti Yoga, he gives a kind of list of all the divine qualities. Intellect, wisdom is there, non delusion, forgiveness, truth, self restraint, calmness, happiness, pain, birth or death, fear, and also fearlessness. So Bhagavan is saying qualities of being arise from me alone. So he describes both the qualities. He says everything is arising from me, but you can identify these as the divine qualities: non-injury, equanimity, contentment, austerity, beneficence, fame, and infamy, even infamy. But what Bhagavan is saying, all these qualities are arising from me in one sense. What is that? Is that the body, mind, intellect is operating only because of the gift of God, which is the presence of the divine, which is imparting this sentiency to us. It is only because this divinity is imparting sentiency to us that anything can express itself. And Bhagavan is saying all these qualities are really arise from me alone in the sense that I'm making this machinery of the body, mind, intellect to be functioning because of the divine presence there. Then Bhagavan gives us 36 qualities of the perfect bhakta. Now, this is a bhakta who is already very much far into the divine and expressing all these divine qualities. He hates no creature, friendly, compassionate to all, free from attachment, free from egoism, balanced in pleasure and pain, and forgiving, and then ever content, steady in meditation, self control, possessed of firm conviction, with mind and intellect dedicated to me. And going further, he by whom the world is not agitated, who cannot be agitated by the world, and who is freed from joy, envy, fear, and anxiety, he who is free from wants, pure, alert, unconcerned, untroubled, renouncing all undertakings. Going further, he says, he who neither rejoices, nor hates, nor grieves, nor desires, renouncing good, renouncing evil, and same to foe and friend, same in honor and dishonor, same in cold and heat, same in pleasure and pain, who is free from attachment. So you can see these themes are running throughout the Bhagavad Gita. this sense of equanimity, this sense of desirelessness, this non-attachment to various things, non-identification with the body, mind, intellect, renouncing everything which is evil, and to whom censure and praise are equal, who is silent, content with anything, homeless. Not that he's going to be thrown out of the home, but homeless means without this home of the body, mind, intellect. In other words, no longer identified with the body, mind, intellect, steady minded. And then in chapter number 16, which we saw, sorry, number 13, is that he mentions these 20 divine qualities. Here's the list again, and you can see that humility, unpretentiousness, uprightness, steadfastness, all these are divine qualities. And what Bhagavan is telling us that we are at the moment identified as this ego identity with the Prakriti, body, mind, intellect. We want to make a transition to the knower of this body, mind, intellect. Who is the real knower of the body, mind, intellect? Is this self, which is Brahman, which is Atman. In order to know Atman or Brahman, we have to cultivate these qualities because it is a bridge between the ego identity in Prakritic formation of the body, mind, intellect and the truth about ourselves, which is Brahman. And this bridge is really how we can cross from one to the other. How? By cultivating these 20 qualities. And these 20 qualities are again extended here, which is non-attachment, non-identification with self, son, etc., constant even-mindedness, unserving devotion unto me by the yoga of non-attachment, resorting to solitary praises. He wants to be left alone, distaste for society of men, constancy in self-knowledge, perception of the end of true knowledge. So here we can see that it is an intense kind of way of being in the world. When we talk about, you know, non-attachment, non-identification, even with the family, resorting to solitary places, distaste for the society of men. This is real tapas. This is real abhyas. So that if you want to cultivate these 20 qualities, it requires very strong determination. But this is where really we have to try and move as much as possible in the first stage of our spiritual journey. And then, of course, in chapter number 14, we saw how we can become, again, go beyond the Prakritic body, mind, intellect by non attachment, non aversion to the gunas, becoming equal minded, staying centered in the self, not initiating any ego activity, equality in pleasure and pain, equanimity to friend and foe, equality in terms of dear and not dear, and honor and dishonor remain the same, censure and pleasure remain the same. A very kind of even minded state of consciousness and centered in the self, non judgmental, non reactive, and non active either. So, none of these things actually then apply to the person who has gone beyond the gunas. So this is the perfected one. So as Bhagwan is saying that, he has given us a lot of idea about the divine qualities and what is their place in terms of our spiritual journey, how, why, and how they are to be cultivated, and what are the qualities which need to be cultivated. And then in the last chapter, what we saw, Bhagwan was saying strong acts of non-attachment. By doing what? By cultivating again these divine qualities, free from pride and delusion, victorious over evil of attachment, desire having completely retired, freed from the pairs of opposites. This expressing itself as a strong acts of non-attachment does what? It lets us to dwell in constantly in the self. It shifts the center of our awareness from the ego, body, mind, intellect to that which is the self. And when that center of awareness shifts to the self, we can say that we are dwelling constantly in the self. Now, that can happen at the intellectual level or it can happen at the experiential level. But certainly, it means that we have to move into this constant contemplation and dwelling in the self. And that makes us to reach the eternal goal because all the delusion disappears. So in chapter number 9, and we can say that, chapter number 16 is a follow on from chapter number 9, because here Bhagwan is describing to us the two extremes of people and God. So the fools, the Rakshasas and the Asuras. He says, these people disregard me when I dwell in human form. They disregard me. They don't believe in God. And especially when they say, okay, this human form, they say, no, no, this is just another human being. He's not a divinity at all. They know not my higher being as the great Lord of all beings. They are full of vain hopes and full of vain actions, vain knowledge, and senseless. They verily are possessed of the delusive nature. What does it mean, delusive nature? We saw those 7 categories of people. Remember the first 3 categories? They are in a state of delusion. Delusion means what? It means I take myself to be this body, mind, intellect, this ego identity, and I say to myself, the only reality is the reality which I see in front of me, which I perceive, and that is delusion. We are taking something which is not real to be real. That is a delusion. Okay? And these people deal in that sense. They are possessed by this delusive nature of the ego, and that is how they function. On the other end of the spectrum are the Mahatmas, the great souls. They are partaking of my divine nature, Bhagavan says. In other words, they are partaking means what? They have got knowledge of the truth and they are identified with the truth and they are actually experiencing this divinity in their own selves. Worship me with a single mind, with a mind devoted to nothing else but God and God alone. Totally God orientation. From ego orientation to total God orientation, these are the Mahatmas, so stable in their understanding of the truth, and they are not devoted to anything else, knowing me as the imperishable source of all beings. And then um, this is kind of giving us the two extremes of the human beings, and this is now where the chapter number 16 is going to start off. So, first of all, Bhagwan is giving us the qualities of the divine nature. So, Bhagwan has said that fearlessness, purity of heart, steadfastness in the yoga of knowledge, alms giving, control of the senses, sacrifice, study of the shastras, straightforwardness, harmlessness, truth, absence of anger, renunciation, peacefulness, peacefulness, and absence of crookedness, compassion to beings, non covetousness, gentleness, modesty, absence of fickleness. Now, as I speak these words, try to think about what it evokes in yourself. If I say absence of anger, think about how many times I have got angry today and yesterday and the day before and the last week and the last year. Here, Bhagwan is saying complete absence of anger. Each one of these qualities is really worth contemplating upon. Not worth contemplating. We have to. If we want to get to the truth, there is no other choice. We have to contemplate, understand, practice. This is the whole paradigm of the Bhagavad Gita. Vigor, forgiveness, fortitude, purity, absence of hatred, absence of pride, these belong to the one born of the divine estate of Bharata. Now, we can say born in the literal sense or born into the divine estate means that he has cultivated this so that we can say this is now person who has been born in that divine estate. Twice born. We can say this is the second birth, as it were. And here then Bhagwan talks about these qualities, and I have kind of classified them whether they belong to the intellect, mind, senses, or they are to do with the action in one's transactional life. So it is one way of trying to understand what Bhagwan is talking about when he's giving us these qualities which are an expression of divinity in one's transactional life and in the sense of being. So again, these are for us to contemplate upon. Each one of them to ask ourselves, where are we in terms of, on a scale of 0 to 10, where are we in terms of fearlessness, for example, straightforwardness, gentleness, forgiveness, absence of crookedness, absence of hatred? Think about it. Because, if we are really interested in living through the Gita, we have to understand all these things and know what they are in relationship to ourselves. And then we can begin to change. And this is why Bhagavan keeps on giving us this list of things, is to, make sure that you understand these things. And then he goes on to talk about the demoniac estate, hypocrisy, arrogance, self-conceit, anger, harshness, ignorance. And he says the divine nature is deemed for liberation, telling us where you're going to go if you cultivate the divine nature, and the demoniacal for bondage, again telling us the pathway, taking us to bondage if we don't cultivate these divine qualities. And if we do, then the divine nature is going to take us towards liberation. And he gives assurance to Arjuna, just in case he's now beginning to doubt, am I born of divine or demoniacal? Bhagavan says, don't grieve. You are born with the divine qualities. See, Bhagavan is so compassionate and knows really where Arjuna stands in terms of his own spiritual development. So Bhagavan says there are two types of beings in this world, the divine and the demoniacal. The divine has been described at length. See, here is only giving us 26 qualities. But before, he has given a whole list in all these chapters. That's why I was bringing all those before we started talking in this chapter. Is that Bhagavan has already given us a lot of qualities to contemplate and cultivate. And here Bhagavan is saying that I'm going to describe at length the demoniacal ones. And this is where he now begins to give us the sense of what these are: demoniacal nature and its consequences. So here he starts off by saying, they do not know what to do, what to refrain from, neither purity nor right conduct nor the truth is found in them. So, as I was saying, this sense of discrimination allows us to know what to do and what not to do, and what is right conduct and what is wrong conduct. Here, there is no discernment, there's no discrimination in the demoniacal person, and therefore ends up doing the wrong thing because he's not even thinking. And if you're not thinking, then you are becoming reactive. If you are becoming reactive, it is only because you are following the vasanas. So you say to yourself, "Oh, I like this," and immediately go and get it. And if it's food, you start eating it, even knowing that I'm a diabetic. I'm not supposed to be eating this huge bar of chocolate, but there is no refrain, and not knowing what to do. Then Bhagavan goes to say, they say the universe is without truth. They don't believe in truth. They say, no, there's nothing called truth. There is no moral basis for any action in the world. Without a God, there is no God, not brought up about by any regular causal sequence. He says there is no kind of causality involved with either divine or anything else. And with lust for its cause, what else? They say there's nothing else. There's no truth. There is no morality. There's no God. There's nothing. And what we are going to do is just desire. Desire becomes the basis of everything. It's about doing your transaction on a day-to-day basis, just based on your likes and dislikes, on what I want to do because it is dictating me to do that. Says what else? There's nothing else. Holding this view, these ruins souls of small intellect. Small intellect means that they don't have the capacity for discrimination. They do fierce deeds, come forth as the enemies of the world for its destruction. And there are many examples in history, if you look at it, that there are people who have come into the world just for the destruction of human beings, genocide taking place, all these kind of things. Where do these things come from? This is what Bhagwan is telling us 10,000 years ago, that there are going to be people like this. And of course, even in his own time, They were there. And then he goes on to say, filled with insatiable desires, full of hypocrisy, pride, and arrogance, holding evil ideas through delusion, they work with impure resolves. Again, the focus is what? The focus is me and mine. The focus is this insatiable desires which keep on expressing themselves and pushing this person towards doing all these wrong things, full of hypocrisy, saying one thing, doing another, thinking one thing, saying another thing. There's a complete fragmentation of the thought, word, and deed. They're not at all aligned. And they keep on doing that with pride and arrogance. I am the most important person in the universe. I have got this, that, and the other. I've got this nature. I've got this capacity. I've got this huge 20 million pound house, etc. Pride about everything, arrogance, holding evil ideas through delusion. They work with impure results. Impure means that they are rajasic and tamasic in nature. And as long as that impurity is there, they will keep on expressing their desires, fulfilling their desires in this kind of way, giving themselves over to immeasurable cares, ending only with death, regarding gratification of lust as their highest aim. Gratification of lust as their highest aim. What are they interested in? Only fulfilling their desire. That is their best thing they want. Highest aim, I want this and I'm going to get it by hook or by crook. And that is their highest aim. And feeling sure that this is all that matters, nothing else matters. It's about me, it's about mine, it's about the gratification of my desires. And that is my highest aim in this life. And that's all I'm going to go for. So, this will remind ourselves of people we have already known. But at the same time, we got to consider that, you know, parts of these things also exist within us. If we want to be honest with ourselves, we will see some of these things are there somewhere within us. Not to this extreme, but certainly we are having desires. We are having this idea that, this is what I want to achieve, this is what I want to do. And I've got this hope and I've got this aspiration which I want to uh, you know, which I'm bound and I'm attached to all these things. And we are also kind of given to anger and, you know, wanting things in our life, which is okay. But when we are following the spiritual path, then we have to examine these things very carefully. Where are we in terms of these qualities which Bhagwan is describing? We say this is an extreme case, as it were. But certainly there are milder cases of the demoniacal nature as well. And what they say is this has today been gained by me. Now this person comes home and say, you know what I did today, what I gained today, what I did, what I attained, what I got. And that is their talk all the time. And we know that, sometimes a group of people come together and what they keep on talking about is nothing but who has what amount of wealth. How did they get there? And this is my wealth. This is what I have. This wealth shall also be mine in the future when they look at other people. Jealousy. They become so jealous about other people and they want the same thing for themselves. And they try so hard to get that. That enemy has been slain by me, the others also I shall destroy. I am the Lord, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect, powerful, and happy. I am the Lord doesn't mean I'm the Lord Bhagwan, but I'm the Lord of my own universe and my own body, mind, intellect. I am the enjoyer. This is what they say. And he says, I am rich and well born. Who else is equal to me? Nobody else is equal to me. I give alms and money. See, this is another wonderful thing, is that giving alms does not arise out of a sattvic intention, but rather it's rajasic and tamasic. They will give alms. Why? Because they want their photograph to be taken, to be publicized in the paper, and say, look, this is what I've got. I will rejoice because this is what I've got. Thus are they deluded by ignorance. So, going further, bewildered by many a fancy, entangled in the snare of delusion, addicted to the gratification of lust, they fall into foul hell. So, this is the consequence. Many a fancy, bewildered by many a fancy, entangled in the snare of delusion. So, you can imagine these two things. What is the snare of delusion? Is that I am this individual ego operating in this world in this kind of way, and the only thing important for me is my desires. My desires, which need to be expressed, I need to get this, and so on and so on. And this world is real and it is the source of my happiness. I'll go and get all my happiness I can from the world. That's one part of it. And the other part is many a fancy. Imagination. Imagination is really when it comes in a mixture with the ego and the desire. Imagine what happens. This kind of fancy imagination that this is to be attained and this is the imagination which I have. So first of all, playing in the imagination, then entangled in this idea that this is me and I want to attain that which has come to my imagination. They get addicted and attached to the objects of their desires and addicted to gratification of lust, desires. Addiction, it becomes like an addiction. I want this, I want this, I want this. And even if it is taken away from there, they get these withdrawal symptoms. And sometimes, people say, oh, I can't live without having this ambition. I can't live without having all these desires. Because if I try to think about giving up all these things, it is as if I've got nothing. I've got nothing to do, nothing to say, nothing to kind of do. In fact, I slip into a kind of lazy state of the mind, a deluded state of the mind. Sometimes I feel I'm completely bored because I've got nothing to do. So they fall into a foul hell. And this is what Bhagavan calls as the kind of slipping down of the demoniacal nature, which drags the person down into this very foul hell. So, what does it mean when we say foul hell? Is that it is really the worst kind of experience one can have. So, imagine that when we talk about hell, we are talking about, the extremes of suffering. And there are various ways in hell is depicted, but of course, at the heart of all that is really suffering. And we know that, this suffering will come if we begin to have all these kind of ways of being in the world and expressing all these fancies and desires and delusions and running after various different things through our desires. We end up in suffering. Self-conceited, stubborn, filled with pride, drunk with wealth, they perform sacrifices in the name of ostentation. So again, they were giving, alms. They were doing dana. But the dana was from where? It was from a rajasic tendency or even a tamasic one, where they don't even know why they're giving something, but they're giving something because everybody else is giving. And even here, the demoniacal person may offer sacrifices, perform sacrifices, but just for showing off. Just to show off, they will do what other people are doing because they want to be recognized that I can also do it and I can do it for show and look as if I'm a pious person. But the thing is, they do things contrary to the scriptural ordinance. They're doing things not according to the Shastras, but they do something which is completely different. And of course, we know that the basis for all our life, our actions, our living, our life is really the Pramana, which is the Shastra Pramana. It is on the basis of the scriptures, that we have to know what is right, what is wrong, what is the divine nature, and how we can move towards that by doing the right thing, thinking right, feeling right, doing right. So if I tell you thinking right, doing right, feeling right, what does that mean? How will you know what is the right thing to do? How will you know what is the right thing to think about? How will you know what is the right feeling you must entertain? We must have some reference point. And of course, here the reference point is the scriptural ordinance. And that is the important bit of it, because the next chapter is going to take the journey into the scriptural ordinance and the basis of working according to the scriptures. What is the most important thing? If we want to say to ourselves, okay, you're telling me to do things according to what the scriptures are telling me, how can I trust it? I don't have any faith in the scriptural injunctions or the ordinance of the scriptures. What we need in order to function in our transactional life according to the Shastra, we need to have primarily the faith in the Shastra. Without that faith, we are not going to go as per the prescriptions of our scriptures. And you're all here because you have faith that the Bhagavad Gita is telling me something which I have faith in. And I'm willing to follow these prescriptions given by the Master himself so that it will take me towards the wellness of the mind and spiritual enlightenment. That is the prescription Bhagavan is giving us. But we need to have faith in the scriptural ordinance. And Bhagavan is going to tell us about faith in the next chapter, which is the threefold faith. Meanwhile, Bhagavan says, is given to egoism, power, haughtiness, lust, anger, and these malicious people hate me in their own bodies and in those of the others. So these people don't want to have any sense of divinity in their own body. In other words, they don't recognize that it is not, it is the Atma which is really making this body, mind, intellect to function. But they will not admit it. And on the contrary, they will hate anything to do with spirituality, with religion, not only in themselves, but also in the other people as well around them. So when they see somebody who has cultivated those qualities which we have been talking about, I hate this person. Look at him. He's too this, that, and the other. So they hate me in their own bodies and they hate in the others as well because they're full of egoism, full of this sense of complete, completely full of this sense of ego, this identity, this me and mine, and very haughty. Pride is there. And this sense of power. Now, why do we say sense of power? Is because these people feel that I am this powerful person. I have got this capacity to express this power in my life. And it is through this power that I express my desire. It is through this power that I'm going to attain all these things which my desires are leading me towards, and full of lust and anger. Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, Matsarya. These are the hallmarks of the ego. Okay. So Kama and Krodha, desire and anger. These, Bhagavan says, are really the things which drive the demoniacal nature. And greed comes more and more as they get more and more. They become greedier and greedier. On the other hand, if they don't get what they want, what is the immediate reaction? Anger. Anger towards the world, anger towards other people who are kind of standing in their way. They will push them out of the way. They will scream and shout and get what they want. So these are the malicious people. Now, again, I have kind of classified these demoniacal qualities in three categories: intellect, mind, and action. So you can see that, if you think about the intellect, for example, they don't believe in any truth. There's no morality. They don't believe in God. There's no God. Wrong conduct all the time, full of hypocrisy, pride, arrogance, holding evil ideas through delusion, egoism, self conceit. In the mind, there is no purity, full of insatiable desires, gratification of lust as the highest aim, full of hope, lust and anger, and hordes of wealth for sensual enjoyments, hatred for God in themselves and others. Action. They don't know what to do and what to refrain from, which Bhagavan has already mentioned. Fears, wrong deeds, enemies in the world, enemies of the world. Destructiveness is there. Work with impure results, perform sacrifice, but only for their own sake and for showing off. And again, contrary to the scriptural ordinance. So again, it is something which we need to think about ourselves. Okay, don't say, okay, this is doesn't belong to me. But really, these are things which we can refine again and again within ourselves. Even if there is a trace of one of these things, try to think about how can you get rid of it once and for all. Okay. And if we can begin to move away from these qualities which are described here, which are representing the extreme of the ego identity, and move towards purification through the Dharma operating system, and move eventually to recognizing and realizing the self, then we are doing according to the scriptural ordinance. We are doing what Bhagwan is telling us and moving towards realization of the self. So the last bit of this chapter is talking about the ordinance of the scriptures as the basis of action. Just like I mentioned, that how do we then move from the devilish or demoniacal to the divine is that we have to act according to the ordinance of the scriptures. And the scriptures, we need to have faith in the scriptures. And faith, of course, Adi Shankaracharya ji kind of defines in a different way. He says faith is a kind of very deep contemplation of the words of the masters and the scriptures so that they become firmly established in ourselves and there is no doubt or confusion in our mind. So let's think about what Bhagwan is saying here. These cruel haters, worst among men in the world, I hurl these evildoers forever into the wombs of the demons only. See how this cycle of birth and death, and it's not just about continuing what we are doing, but it is also about what have we done in this life, which is going to affect the next life. And Bhagwan has already talked to us that, if we are, and this was based on Arjuna's question, is that, yeah, you're talking about self-realization. Suppose I do a lot of work and I do abhyas and vairagya and I do a lot of tapas and sadhana, and then before my end of life, I don't achieve realization. What's going to happen to me in my next life? Bhagavan says if you've purified yourself, you can be born in a pious family. Or even better, if that purification has reached such a stage, you can be born in a family of yogis so that there is a head start. So it means that Bhagwan is saying that if you behave like this again and again, then you'll go into those kind of families or lives where this is expressed again and again in in the life of that person. And then he goes on to say these entering into this demoniacal wombs and deluded, not attaining to me, birth after birth, they thus fall into a condition still lower than that. So it's Bhagavan is saying it's like a spiraling down. They behave badly, they go down. They behave even worse, they go down even further, and so on and so on. And Bhagavan is saying they keep on going round and round into this kind of lives, life after life, birth after birth. They fall into a condition still lower than that. These are the three gates of hell. Remember this. Remember this verse because it is giving us a very clear indication. What is it which we are supposed to avoid as much as possible in our day to day life, in moment to moment of contemplation and action? Three gates of hell, destructive of the self: lust, anger, and greed. When these things are expressing themselves in any way, we know that we are stepping into the wrong direction. We are stepping into the gates of hell, because once this cycle starts of desire, expression of desire, attachment to the objects of desire, and this anger which arises because constantly I'm in a state of anxiety whether I'm going to get it or not. I get angry when something is there and I can't get it. And greed, I want more and more and more of these things. Now, it doesn't mean that it is something material. It could be anything in the world. Kanchan, Kamini, Kirti. It could be wealth. It could be passions which you are developing in yourself. I've got this talent. I want to, have this in my life. And Kirti, name and fame. People even go for name and fame. And there is this desire for these kind of things. And anger will arise. And greed will arise. So Bhagavan is saying these one should abandon forever. One should abandon, because if we don't, then we are moving in the wrong direction. We are moving towards bondage and we want to move towards liberation. These are the red flags. Wherever there is this kind of thing coming up in our day to day existence, immediately recognize it and immediately turn away from that. Then Bhagavan says, a man who is liberated from these three gates of darkness, Akanteya, practices what is good for him and thus goes to the supreme goal. Very clear corollary to the last verse. So Bhagavan is not leaving at this and says, okay, you go there, these are the gates to hell. But Bhagavan says, if one is liberated from these ways of behaving in the world, okay, which means the um, kama, krodha, lobha, these things, if we turn away from there and we get liberated from these gates to darkness, he says that person goes to the supreme goal. Now, how do we understand this lust, greed, and anger? Is to say, what is it? How does it express itself? Is it expressing in my own life? What can I do about it? Which Bhagwan has already given to us, the method by which it is going to be done, and all the tools which we have to use, and the contemplation and meditation and concentration which is available to us in chapter number 6. All this have been given to us. So there's no excuse. Oh, I don't know how to deal with all these things. And then he says, he having cast aside ordinance of the scriptures, acts under the impulse of desire, attains neither perfection, nor happiness, nor the supreme goal. Again, very clear. Those having cast aside the ordinance of the scriptures. In other words, they are cast aside the dharma operating system, because the scriptures talk about dharma. They talk about the right action, the right thinking, the right feeling in the world. Set aside ordinance of the scripture. They act under the impulse of desire, ego operating system. So they have thrown away the dharma operating system. They are operating according to the ego operating system. They don't attain perfection. They don't get happiness. And they don't get the supreme goal, because that will not be available to them in this way in which they are living. So remember, this is really an important part of it, is to understand how the scriptures fit into this whole idea of liberation. It is essential that we understand what the scriptures are telling us. That's why we are studying these things. so that we know Bhagavad Gita is telling us what is right, what is wrong, and what are the qualities to cultivate and move towards that ultimate purpose of life, which is liberation. The supreme goal he's mentioning is indeed liberation, and he says we have to move towards that. And in order to do that, we have to go according to the Dharma operating system or the ordinance of the scriptures, away from the ego operating system. Therefore, he says finally, let the scriptures be your authority, nothing else, not the authorities of your own ego and your own mind, which says, oh, this is what is to be done. Scriptures are the authority in determining what ought to be done and what ought not to be done, what is right, what is wrong. And Dharma is all about having this fine discrimination between what is right and what is wrong. And according to the authority of the scriptures, if we kind of carry this out, having known what is said in the commandments of the scripture, you should act here in this world. Very direct commandment. Okay. Arjun, Bhagwan has already told him, Arjun, you are born in the with a divine nature and with the divine qualities. But it is a statement which we should contemplate on. We should, how do we act in this world? Remember, this was the question Arjuna asked right at the very beginning. Tell me what to do. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. I'm going to put my bow and arrow down. Bhagwan has answered that question directly here. Do your actions according to the authority of the scriptures, determining what ought to be done in the middle of the battlefield or anywhere else, and what ought not to be done in the middle of the battlefield or anywhere else. Why I'm saying anywhere else is because we are transacting in this world as not in the battlefield, but the battlefield of life. And each one of our lives is different in the way in which we are battling with various different things. What is going to be our guide? Our guide is the ordinance of the scriptures. So here we come to the end of this short chapter. And of course, I'm going to remind you about the conscious spiritual living. What is going to be done? The 4 A's of conscious living: alertness, awareness, alertness, attention, action. The 4 B's: learning about letting go, background, beliefs, behavior, backwash. The 4 C's: clarity, comprehension, conviction, commitment. And the 4 D's: attitudes to sadhana and abhyas, which are determination, devotion, dedication, and discipline. This is a very good framework for spiritual living. If we are claiming ourselves to be the seeker, then this is what we should be having in mind all the time. What are the 4 C's and what are the 4 B's and what are the 4 A's and the 4 D's, and how can I bring them as a reality in my life? They become real, not something which is displayed on this slide, but something which is real to me because I'm experiencing that right now. This is how we should be doing these things. Okay, so what will you do now? Reflect, understand the natures, behaviors of the divine and the demoniacal, and then remembering the cultivation of the divine qualities, prepare a plan, saying to yourself, this week I'm going to practice this divine quality of humility, for example, and therefore cultivating that again and again, going through all these 20 plus qualities which Bhagwan has given in this chapter. And then all the rest of the chapters is given a big list. If you put them all together, you will see that it is a definitive list of things we can cultivate and practice in our own lives, and you should prepare a plan. Contemplate on the references to the divine qualities extensively given by Bhagwan in the previous chapters, just like I mentioned to you. Consider how these can be practiced in your own life, and then continue to practice all the other techniques from the previous chapters. Prepare, execute a daily intensified plan of meditation if you already have one, and if you don't, prepare one. Enjoy the sadhana, stay safe, and stay well. Thank you. So we'll stop there and we will conclude with the prayers.
ॐ सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः, सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः, सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु, मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ असतो मा सद्गमय, तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय, मृत्योर्मामृतं गमय। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते, पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। ॐ न तत्र सूर्यो भाति न चन्द्रतारकं, नेमा विद्युतो भान्ति कुतोऽयमग्निः, तमेव भान्तमनुभाति सर्वं, तस्य भासा सर्वमिदं विभाति। बोलिए श्री सद्गुरुनाथ महाराज की जय।